I keep thinking about a little corner grocery store that sat at the end of my street when I was young. Sunday afternoons after church, folks would wander in, retirees with their lists, mothers tugging kids along, men who'd just been laid off trying to stretch every dollar. And I remember one neighbor, a proud Korean War veteran living on a fixed income, leaning over to me at the checkout and whispering, "I just hope the card goes through this time." The shame in his voice, the dignity he was trying so hard to protect. I've carried that moment with me through decades of watching American politics. Lately, I think about it more than ever, because right now, millions of Americans, many in places like Florida, are living with that same quiet panic. They're wondering if the safety net they've paid into, the programs that keep them afloat, might suddenly vanish. And here's what's so extraordinary about this moment. The very people who built a movement around security and stability are discovering that the rug is being pulled out from under them, not by outsiders, but by the leaders they helped elect. That's the story playing out today. Not in Washington's marble hallways, but in living rooms, supermarkets, doctors' offices, and around kitchen tables across some of America's most loyal Republican strongholds. To understand how we got here, you have to see the two crises now crashing into each other. And friends, I wish this were just another Washington scuffle, but it's not. It's real, and it will reshape American politics for years to come. Two emergencies are unfolding at once, each serious on its own, together forming a perfect storm. On one side, a government shutdown now dragging into its second month, threatening food assistance for vulnerable families in more than half the states. On the other, a healthcare crisis building quietly but steadily, with subsidies for 22 million Americans set to expire while Washington remains paralyzed. Shutdowns have become almost routine. We've all seen this play out before, but this time is different. This time the fallout reaches the most basic parts of American life, putting food on the table and seeing a doctor when you're sick. And the first crisis, the one hitting the dinner table, has a deadline measured in weeks, not months. The Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, most folks still call it food stamps, is a lifeline for about 42 million Americans, 1 in 8 people. And despite all the talk over the years about dependency or responsibility, the truth is simpler. These aren't people looking for handouts. They're seniors whose savings ran out, families blindsided by illness or job loss, and working Americans whose paychecks simply don't stretch far enough anymore. So when the Trump administration announced it wouldn't use emergency funds to keep SNAP running during the shutdown, it sent shockwaves through communities most politicians never see. In at least 25 states, food assistance was about to vanish. The head of Hunger Free America even warned it could become the greatest hunger crisis since the Great Depression. Think about that. Families suddenly choosing between groceries and electricity, seniors choosing between prescriptions and dinner, veterans wondering where their next meal is coming from. That kind of fear, the fear of not being able to feed your family, cuts deep. A federal judge stepped in, recognizing the damage a shutdown of SNAP would cause and ordering the administration to keep the program funded. And that ruling mattered. Miss even 1 month of food assistance, and everything starts to fall apart. Rent, work, school, health. But then came the political tangle. President Trump told his attorneys to seek clarification from the judge on how SNAP could legally be funded under shutdown rules. On paper, that sounded reasonable. In practice, it left millions of Americans waiting, checking their benefit cards daily, unsure whether they'd have enough to buy food. And sometimes the waiting, the not knowing, is its own kind of suffering. But here's the truth. The SNAP crisis is only a symptom of something larger. This shutdown is tied directly to a much bigger fight over the future of American healthcare. At the center of it all is a deadlock. Democrats refuse to reopen the government without negotiations to extend Affordable Care Act subsidies, which expire at the end of the year. Republicans say they won't discuss those subsidies until the government is reopened, a perfect catch-22. And while Washington plays chicken, vital services are collapsing, and millions of Americans are caught in the middle. We're seeing shortages of air traffic controllers, men and women working without pay, causing delays at major airports. Head Start programs that serve more than 65,000 low-income children are on the brink of shutting down. The ripples from this shutdown are touching every corner of American life. But the healthcare piece of this crisis deserves a closer look, because once you understand the numbers, the real dollars and cents, you'll see why Republicans are quietly panicking. The enhanced subsidies for Affordable Care Act marketplace plans are the only thing making health insurance possible for millions of Americans who don't get employer coverage and aren't yet on Medicare. These subsidies were boosted a few years back, and they've worked. Enrollment is at an all-time high, but those enhanced subsidies expire on December 31st, just weeks away. And if they disappear, premiums won't just rise, they'll explode. Overnight, costs are expected to double, triple, even quadruple. 22 million Americans will see their premiums jump an average of 114%. Let's put that into real terms. For someone making $35,000 a year, maybe a retiree working part-time or a self-employed contractor, premiums will climb by more than $1,500 annually. That's not pocket change, that's months of groceries, or half a year of utility bills. A middle-class family of four making $75,000 a year will see their annual costs rise by more than $3,300. A similar family earning $85,000 will owe nearly $200 extra every single month, permanently. And for a family making $66,000, if just one person gets seriously ill, they could face an additional $700 in out-of-pocket expenses. So, they'll pay more every month and get less coverage when it matters most. Families are already sitting around kitchen tables trying to figure out what to cut. Braces for a child might have to wait. Routine care gets postponed. Every dollar is reassessed. And for many, no matter how they shuffle the numbers, the math simply won't work. They'll be forced to go without insurance altogether. This crisis is national, but nowhere is it hitting harder than Florida. Florida is ground zero for the subsidy expiration for one simple reason. It leads the nation in ACA marketplace enrollment. 4.7 million people. Nearly 5 million Floridians rely on these subsidies to keep their families insured. For them, this isn't a distant policy fight. It's a direct threat to their health and financial survival. Insurance companies aren't waiting to see how this plays out. They're already bracing for impact. Molina Healthcare in Florida, for example, has announced rate hikes of more than 40%. Hitting over 90,000 Floridians. These aren't future warnings. These changes are happening right now. But the most alarming numbers come from real families. Take a 60-year-old couple in Florida earning $85,000 a year, too young for Medicare, trying to bridge the gap. When these subsidies expire, their annual insurance costs will jump by more than $22,600. That's not a typo. That's a quarter of their entire pre-tax income. A quarter of everything they bring in just to stay insured. For most families, that's impossible. It's financially crushing. It forces choices no American should ever face. And when you see increases on that scale, premiums swallowing a fourth of a family's income, you start to understand why the Trump administration rolled out what they call an alternative. They want to expand access to catastrophic plans. On paper, it sounds like a lifeline, but critics have a different name for these policies. Junk insurance. These catastrophic plans require families to spend more than $10,000 a year in out-of-pocket deductibles before the policies pay for most medical costs. $10,000. For the average family, a $10,000 deductible is tantamount to having no insurance at all. Because if you're living paycheck to paycheck, if you're already struggling with rising costs, you don't have $10,000 sitting around waiting for a medical emergency. So, you'd be paying premiums every month for coverage you functionally can't use because you can't afford to meet the deductible. The inevitable consequence, and I think everyone in Washington knows this, even if they won't say it publicly, is that millions of people will be forced to go without insurance entirely. They simply won't be able to afford the massive premium hikes, and they won't be able to afford the $10,000 deductibles of the catastrophic plans. The projections are grim. An estimated 4 million people are expected to become uninsured in the next year alone, simply because they can no longer afford the cost of a plan. And this isn't a one-time event. The nonpartisan Congressional Budget Office has projected that if these subsidies are discontinued, the number of uninsured Americans will decrease by 2.2 million in 2026. But it doesn't stop there. By 2034, the CBO projects that 3.8 million fewer people will have health insurance per year. We're talking about a long-term unraveling of healthcare coverage in America, affecting working-class families, self-employed individuals, early retirees, people who've worked hard, played by the rules, and thought they had their healthcare sorted out. Perhaps the most troubling aspect of this entire crisis is how unaware most people are about what's coming. Recent polling shows that about 6 in 10 people who currently buy their own coverage have heard just a little or nothing at all about the subsidy expiration. They have no idea what's about to hit them. They're going about their lives, paying their premiums, assuming everything will continue as it has been. And then November 1st arrives. That's when open enrollment begins. And millions of Americans will log into their marketplace accounts to check their 2026 premiums, and they'll be confronted for the first time with costs that have doubled or tripled overnight. Imagine that moment. You've been paying, let's say, $200 a month for your family's coverage. It's tight, but you've made it work. And then you log in and see your new premium is $450 a month, or $600. The shock, the immediate panic of trying to figure out how you'll possibly make that work. Now, here's where this story takes a turn that fascinates me as someone who's observed American politics for decades. This isn't just a social crisis or a healthcare policy debate. This is a political earthquake, and the tremors are running directly through the Republican Party's own base. You see, the decision by the Trump administration and congressional Republicans to block the extension of ACA subsidies isn't a targeted strike against their political opposition. It's not hitting blue states or Democratic voters primarily. It's actually a broadside attack on the very voters who put them in power. And I don't think that's hyperbole. It's a statistical fact that reveals a fundamental political miscalculation. More than 3 in 4 people currently enrolled in the ACA marketplaces live in states that President Trump won in the 2024 election. Let me say that again because it's so important. Over 75% of the people who will be devastated by these premium hikes live in states that voted for Trump. The state of Florida, which went deep red for Trump and has the highest ACA enrollment in the entire nation, is the perfect example of this disconnect. The voters who gave Republicans their mandate are the same ones who are about to get financially crushed by their policies. The coverage losses and premium hikes will be disproportionately concentrated in Republican strongholds. The list of states where the impact will be most severe reads like a roster of GOP core territory: Alabama, Florida, Georgia, Mississippi, North Carolina, South Carolina, Tennessee, Texas. Every single one of these states is a Republican stronghold, yet their citizens, people who voted Republican, who support conservative values, who want limited government, are the ones who will bear the brunt of this policy failure. And here's what really gets me. This disconnect is not lost on the voters themselves. Recent internal polling reveals a stunning gap between the Republican leadership's agenda and what their own base actually wants. A new poll found that 59% of self-identified Republicans, nearly 6 in 10, actually favor extending the enhanced subsidies. And among Make America Great Again supporters specifically, 57% want these subsidies extended. Think about that. Trump's own base, the people who wear the red hats and attend the rallies, want the affordable health care that the administration is actively working to dismantle. This isn't Democrats criticizing Republican policy. This is Republican voters saying they need this help. And when it comes to assigning blame, the public, including many Republican supporters, knows exactly who's responsible. When voters who support extending the subsidies were asked who deserves the most blame if they expire, 39% said President Trump, and 37% said Republicans in Congress. Only 22% blamed the Democrats. The messaging isn't working. The public understands who's blocking this extension. This has created what I can only describe as full-blown panic within the Republican Party leadership. And I don't use that word lightly. Leaked internal strategy documents and private polling, information that was never intended for public release, show that party leadership is genuinely terrified. They're facing a disaster, and they know it. The source of their panic is the vulnerability of their House members in purple districts. These are the representatives who hold the key to the Republican majority, members in districts with high ACA enrollment, districts that Trump won, but only narrowly. They know that when their constituents get those doubled premium bills in January 2026, their own political careers will be on the line. These are the members who will have to go home and face town halls full of angry voters demanding to know why their health care just became unaffordable. For these vulnerable Republicans, this is history repeating itself in the most terrifying way. They remember the 2018 midterms vividly. Healthcare was the single issue that propelled Democrats to a blue wave victory. Democrats won 41 seats and flipped control of the House of Representatives. Republicans lost in 2018 because they were perceived as attacking people's health care. And now, President Trump is doing it again. Only this time, the impact is more direct, more measurable, and more severe. Even Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene, about as staunch a conservative as you'll find in Congress, has publicly expressed frustration with what she calls the failures of decades of both parties. When someone like Greene is voicing concerns, you know the internal fissures run deep. The panic has become so acute that it spurred legislative action, though not necessarily to solve the underlying problem. A small bipartisan group of House lawmakers, including several of these terrified Republicans, has introduced legislation to extend the subsidies for just one more year. Now, let me be clear about what's happening here. This isn't about finding a long-term solution. This is about political survival. A one-year extension would keep the affordable premiums in place through the fall of 2026, conveniently pushing the financial cliff safely past the midterm elections. It's transparently political, and it's exposed a deep civil war within the party. On one side, Republican members in competitive districts are begging their leadership to pass an extension so they don't get slaughtered at the ballot box. On the other side, powerful conservative groups are pressuring leadership to hold the line and let the subsidies expire, arguing for ideological purity over political pragmatism. It's a classic tension in American politics, principles versus survival, and all of this entire volatile political environment is set to collide with another major political event in Florida, creating what I can only describe as a ticking time bomb. Governor DeSantis and Florida lawmakers have proposed placing 7 controversial constitutional amendments on the November 2026 ballot, all designed to cap, cut, or potentially eliminate property taxes in the state. Now, property tax issues are always contentious in Florida, but here's what makes this extraordinary. These tax measures will be on the exact same ballot that voters cast in November 2026. Just 10 months after those same voters were hit with massive, life-altering healthcare premium increases that the Trump administration refused to prevent. This isn't a coincidence. This is a perfect storm of political miscalculation. Picture the sequence of events. In January 2026, millions of Florida voters see their health insurance premiums double or triple. They spend the next 10 months struggling to make their budgets work, cutting back on everything else just to stay insured, or being forced to drop their coverage entirely. They're stressed, they're angry, they feel betrayed by leaders they trusted. And then, in November, they walk into the voting booth to cast ballots on tax policy and congressional races. What emotional state do you think those voters will be in? What kind of mood will they bring to that ballot box? They'll be furious, financially strapped, still reeling from sticker shock, and they'll remember exactly who told them the subsidies didn't need to be extended, who said the market would sort itself out, who prioritized ideology over their family's well-being. The predicted outcome is a massive, uncontrollable backlash. The accumulated anger from a year of financial pain on healthcare is expected to overwhelm all other issues on the ballot. The combination of these two events, the healthcare crisis and the tax vote, is poised to trigger an electoral collapse for the GOP in Florida. The political strategy that was meant to solidify Republican control could become the very thing that turns Florida's Republican-held House seats blue. But, friends, to really understand the depth of this crisis, we need to step back and see how these two emergencies, the SNAP crisis and the ACA subsidy crisis, aren't merely parallel events happening at the same time. They're a compounding catastrophe. They represent what military strategists would call a pincer movement, a two-front assault on the same demographic. We're talking about America's working poor and lower middle class. These are families who exist on what I call the razor's edge of financial stability. These are people for whom a single unexpected car repair or medical bill can trigger a spiral into real hardship. For this population, SNAP benefits and ACA subsidies aren't abstract entitlements or government handouts. They're the twin pillars that make a dignified life possible. The political maneuvering in Washington treats these programs as separate bargaining chips, separate line items in budget negotiations. But on the ground, in real American households, they're deeply interconnected. That family of four making $66,000 a year, the family facing an additional $700 in out-of-pocket medical costs, may also be just one lost paycheck away from needing SNAP benefits to feed their children. When their budget gets shattered by a $200 a month increase in health premiums, what's the first thing that gets cut? The food budget. This isn't theoretical. This is an impossible real-world decision that millions of families will face: medicine or meals. And when families start making those choices, the ripple effects are devastating. The threat to SNAP doesn't just create a hunger crisis, it removes the only remaining safety net for families who are about to be bankrupted by healthcare costs. This dual assault creates a cascading effect that will overwhelm local and state resources, particularly in the Republican-led states that are set to be hit hardest. When SNAP funding becomes uncertain, families turn to local food banks and pantries, charitable organizations that are already stretched to their breaking point. Many of these food banks rely partly on federal programs, so they are getting hit from both sides: increased demand and decreased supply. Simultaneously, when 4 million Americans lose their health insurance, they don't simply stop getting sick. They don't stop having medical emergencies. What they do is delay preventative care. They let chronic conditions like diabetes and hypertension worsen. They avoid seeing doctors until they absolutely have no choice. And then, where do they end up? In emergency rooms. Emergency room care is the most expensive and least efficient form of medical treatment possible. And when uninsured people use emergency services, who pays? We all do. The costs get passed on to everyone else, driving up insurance rates across the board and straining the financial viability of hospitals, especially rural and community hospitals that are already operating on thin margins. We've seen this before. We know what happens when millions of people lose coverage. Hospitals start closing, healthcare deserts expand, communities suffer. This is the doom loop that the current political strategy is creating. It's a deliberate disinvestment in public stability, and the consequences get forced onto local communities that don't have the resources to handle them. The ideological push to dismantle the federal social safety net doesn't make the problems disappear. It merely shifts the burden onto an already fractured system of local charities and emergency services. And that's why the political panic brewing within the Republican Party is about more than just the ACA. It's about more than any single policy. It's the dawning, terrifying realization that their own voters, the same people who cheer at rallies, who defend the president on social media, who proudly call themselves conservatives, are critically dependent on the very economic supports that their party is actively dismantling. The 2026 midterms won't be a simple referendum on healthcare policy or tax proposals. It will be a visceral public reaction to a year of forced impossible choices. It will be a referendum on the fundamental question of whether government has any responsibility to provide a basic floor of economic security and human dignity. And that question is being answered with a resounding no through the simultaneous attacks on both food assistance and healthcare affordability. You know, after all these years of watching American politics, through good times and hard times, through moments of unity and periods of bitter division, I've learned one fundamental truth. People don't ultimately vote based on speeches or slogans or cable news headlines. They vote based on what's happening at their kitchen table, on what keeps them up at night, on whether they feel their leaders see them, hear them, and stand with them when times get tough. And Florida, along with millions of Republicans across the country and those red states I mentioned, is about to face one of the hardest years in recent memory. Not because of foreign threats, not because of some global emergency beyond our control, but because of choices made right here at home, in Washington, by leaders who were elected to represent their interests. When that moment comes, when the bills arrive in the mail, when the coverage disappears, when the grocery budget has to stretch even thinner, folks are going to ask themselves the same timeless question that Americans have asked in every generation. Who stood with me when it mattered? And that answer will shape the future of American politics more than any rally, any tweet, or any 30-second campaign ad ever could. Because at the end of the day, politics isn't really about ideology or party loyalty. It's about whether the people we elect understand the lives we're actually living, and whether they're willing to help when we need it most. That's the social contract. That's what holds a country together. And right now, that contract is being tested in ways we haven't seen in a very long time. If this conversation helped clarify some of what's unfolding, especially if you're in Florida or you've got family there, go ahead and tap that like button. It really does help more people understand what's coming. And if you've lived through political cycles like this before, if you remember how 2010 felt, or 2018, I'd genuinely love to hear your perspective. Drop a comment and share your story, because I learn from you as much as I hope you get something from these conversations. And of course, if you want more thoughtful, calm, honest discussions like this, if you're tired of the shouting and want someone to just walk through these issues with clarity and respect, subscribe to the channel. We're going to keep talking about the real issues folks are living with every day. Not the noise, not the manufactured outrage, just the truth, as best as I can see it, after all these years of watching this great country navigate its challenges. Thank you for spending this time with me today. Take care of yourselves, take care of each other, and I'll see you in the next one.